Like, diversity isn't about quotas. Diversity is not about, oh, I got to fill certain boxes so I don't get in trouble. That's not what diversity is about. Diversity is about building strong teams.
Welcome to the Emerging Litigation Podcast, a co-production of HB Litigation, Critical Legal Content, Law Street Media, and Fastcase. I'm your host, Tom Hagee. Welcome again to the Emerging Litigation Podcast. I'm your host, Tom Hagee. So you got 2 welcomes already, so more than you paid for. So today we're going to talk about diversity, specifically as it relates to intellectual property teams. My guest, I'm happy to say, is Tara Trask. She's president of Trask Consulting. She's a leading expert on juries and trials. That means picking juries, prepping witnesses, running mock hearings, presenting evidence in a compelling way, and advising teams on trial technology. It's all good stuff. Tara and her team focuses on complex commercial litigation. In addition to IP litigation, they handle cases involving antitrust, securities, contract disputes, fraud, product liability, insurance, oil and gas, regulatory enforcement, and white-collar actions. All complex stuff. Over 3 decades, Tara has been involved in several hundred jury trials. It's quite possible she has seen more IP trials than anyone. I dare you to find somebody who has seen more. They may be out there. I've known Tara for quite a while and have always been impressed with her incredible drive, her energy, her creativity. She makes me feel lazy. That's not a trait I'm known for, although it's a fact. In this episode, Tara is going to share how, in preparing for a panel on diversity for a conference run by the American Intellectual Property Law Association, or the AIPLA, she realized how important diversity was to trial teams, how unexamined it was, and how passionate she was for the subject. So rather than tell you what she learned, I will let her do that because she can do it much more eloquently than I can. Also, in addition to this being our first episode, that sadly for some of you, we're releasing in both audio and video. This introduces what will be a special series, kind of a sub-podcast, which Tara will guest host or guest host. I don't know what I just said. She has generously decided to contribute to the Emerging Litigation Podcast in this way to raise awareness of how important diversity in trial teams is, not only because it feels like the right thing to do, which it is, but because, as she said, it simply produces stronger teams. And so I'll let you tell her, I'll let you tell her nothing. I'll let her tell you all about it. Now, here's my interview with Tara Trask, who, as is common for her, is participating from the road. I hope you enjoy it. One last thing. I noticed I wave my hands a lot, pretty much right at the camera. So try to ignore that. And I promise to do better. Isn't that really all we can do? Here's Tara and me. Or Tara. Here's my interview with Tara. Before you launched yourself and your colleagues into this subject and researching what others wrote, and before you analyzed your own cases, you must have had experiences that made you think there was something to this, to the value of diverse trial teams in intellectual property matters specifically. Anything come to mind?
Well, I think it's actually not that I saw diversity working in a positive way in diversity and trust. What I saw is a lack of diversity, frankly, right? I mean, if you work in intellectual property trials, intellectual property litigation, one of the things you quickly recognize is that there's a real lack of diversity. I spend a lot of time sitting around in rooms where I'm the only girl. It's been that, a lot of times I don't notice it, but that's when I do notice it, I think, oh, okay, that's changing. That has changed, but I've been doing this for a long time, and so it was really the lack of diversity. I will say this too, that the other thing that I think historically, it's always kind of made me chuckle. It took me a while to notice it, is that a lot of times, if there is a girl on the team, or I should say it better, if there's a woman on the team,
Mm-hmm.
they give her the damages expert. that just happens. I mean, anybody that tries intellectual property cases and hearing me saying this shouldn't be surprised. I mean, it's just historically, if there is a female on the team, she gets the damages expert. And I've been barking at teams for a long time, like, please stop, like the third year associate who's a guy who's putting on the technical expert, he doesn't have any more technical expertise than the third year female associate. Like, what gives? That's just, I noticed that historically happening. I still see it. It's less true than it used to be, but I think, to answer your question, I think that's part of it. It was like a lack of diversity, and then to the extent that we did see at least some gender diversity, we would see women being given damages.
Yeah, I guess
Yeah.
I'm missing the point why the damages expert is more of a softball assignment.
Yeah, right. Because it's
Is
sort
it?
of funny, right? Because, well, in a patent case, I think you could say because it's still math, right? Like, so it's still technically like STEM, but it's not. Maybe it doesn't have to do with like, DSL technology or
I got you. Okay,
like antenna technology or something. So I do think there's this sense that, and I don't know. I don't know. I think it's this weird default. Because to your point, yeah, damages is still math, right? That's still STEM.
Yeah, that's
but
STEM.
as putting on witnesses at a patent, other than fact witnesses, right? Sometimes they might get a fact witness, but when it comes down to experts, now it's changing. It's definitely changing.
I got you.
I definitely changing. So
Yeah, I see. It's not technical and science.
right.
I understand that. It's part of STEM, but it's not. Okay, I got you.
Yep.
Hardcore STEM, I guess. Now you
Right.
you
Right.
shared with me a photo that a reporter took of that they took of you at a trial in Marshall, and you said the reporter pointed out that you were the only female in the photo.
So yeah, so that one's an interesting one because actually the client took the photo. He's a photographer,
okay.
but it was later when I was actually being interviewed. Oh, that's right. I had forgotten about that. I was being interviewed about diversity. Anyway, somehow that picture came up,
Yeah.
and yes, it's a great picture. It's on my website. I love it. It's just this really dynamic picture. It's a celebratory photograph taken in Marshall after a win. I'm standing next to the lead trial counsel and our very charismatic and hilarious client who is from the Isle of Man. And so he was just sort of this bombastic Brit, and you could tell how excited he is in the picture, and everybody, not everybody on the team, but almost everybody on the team is in the photo, and I'm the only female in the photograph. I didn't know. I just never noticed that,
That says
actually.
something. That says something about you that you didn't notice until you saw a photo and somebody pointed it out.
Somebody pointed it out to
You're
me.
obviously comfortable.
Yeah, but it's also because most of the people, not everybody, but a lot of the people in the photo are people I've worked with many times, people who I have long relationships with. So I when I looked at the picture, I was like, oh, look at me and my bunch of my friends and some clients.
Yeah.
But it is indicative of and sadly there's one woman who was on the team, not an attorney, but a very, very highly revered legal assistant who just was not in that photograph, but there was a female legal assistant on that team.
Okay. So you studied your own cases and you presented these findings to the AIPLA in 2017, maybe since then as well. Then you went bigger. So before we get into what you found from your own research, tell us about the academic research that you uncovered that dealt with team diversity. So there's two questions. What did that research say about whether diversity is effective, besides being the right thing to do? And then conversely, how does lack of diversity on a trial team potentially impact the trial?
As you would expect, I mean, the data, the research that's out there, the academic research supports the notion that diversity is a good thing, but it's not a good thing just because it's good to have diverse teams for the benefit of the teams or the benefit even of the individuals, right? I think when we think of diversity, we think of, oh, it's opportunity, right? It's opportunity for women, it's opportunity for people of color, whatever. And that's a piece of it. But the research clearly indicates, and I think this comports with most people's experience as well, that you're going to have better outcomes. And it's not so much that that's something that you can prove, right? That's not, because that's just not how this data is. That's not how you would look at it. But when you talk to people, having people with different backgrounds, having people of different ages, having people who come from different places, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, that just provides a richness to any situation. Trial teams are no different. I think you could say the same thing about financial deal teams or groups of teachers, or I think any group of people, you are better off with diversity. And that's what the data supports. And there's a lot of reasons for that specific to jury trials. Partially because, I think you're going to, like juries, right? Juries are 12 people, 6 people, 8 people. And what's great about juries is it is the collective wisdom of juries that are their magic. I think that's always been true. It's the collective. And that's the same idea, I think, is what makes a diverse team better, is that collective knowledge, the collective IQ, if you will, right? My old mentor, Dr. Phil, used to say that the average jury has an effective IQ of 1,200, right? Because you've got 100, assuming everybody's got an average IQ of 100, times 12, at least. So it's sort of the same idea, except just sort of supercharged when you add the additional elements of different backgrounds, different experiences. Everybody brings different things to the collective decision making, and that's just a better thing all around.
Let's jump into it and talk about your research process. How did you approach the project, and talk about the demographics of the participants and all that?
Yeah, so it was, what was fascinating. So the first time I presented at AIPLA, I was just on a panel with a bunch of other people talking about diversity, and I'm thinking, okay, what am I gonna, what do I have to say about this? And that's when I decided, let me just look at demographically my own trials. So the first time I reported, it was literally my trials, and I went and looked at gender and race. And then because they were my own trials, I was also able to compare and actually look at the gender and race of the jurors, because that was the other piece that I thought was sort of interesting. We weren't able to carry that through, but that first one, it was interesting. But what was fascinating was, even though I just had a little sliver on this panel, and I think I presented 4 or 5 slides, and people were mesmerized. Like, everybody loved that information. And so that was a big light bulb, actually, was that, I kind of had already realized that there's very little data on the demographic makeup of trial teams, period. And there's zero on trial teams in IP cases, because there's somewhere between 60 and 80 patent trials every year. It's very niche, so it's not surprising there's not a ton of data on it. But the reaction from the audience at AIPLA was profound. And so the committee, there were a couple of committee chairs that came up and said, we really want to consider making this into something bigger.
Right.
And yeah.
And so, I mean, it doesn't get more personal also for people. So no wonder people were engaged. But I think that's that's great that there's so much excitement about it, interest in it. And diving into what you learned from it, you started off by saying that the data were consistent with legal field generally. So what did you find about minorities and women on IP trial teams?
And so initially, right, and frankly, the data hasn't changed all that much, right? I mean, obviously, with the data that I presented, it wasn't surprising. It wasn't surprising to anybody, but I think in some ways that's part of the reason why it was so impactful, is because it demonstrated in stark relief just the problem. Frankly, that's the shortest way to put it, is the problem, which is, I think in that first 7 trials, 1 female lead counsel, 6 males, right? It was just predominantly white men. Women were, scattered a little bit, but other than that, like, in terms of non-whites, very, very few across the board. In terms of, I'm just looking at that's here right now. So lead, partner with a speaking role, partner with a non-speaking role, associate with a speaking role. There were 3 people of color out of almost 40 people. So that's ridiculous, right? And so, and there was nothing that was surprising about that data to the people who were observing it for the first time. But I do think that was part of my thinking. And when we started having conversations with AIPLA about partnering to collect this data regularly, because my idea was, okay, well, this is where we're starting from. This is the benchmark. So how can we, if we collect this data and we report this data, we collect the data more broadly, not just the trials that I'm showing up to.
Right.
That it could at least, at least hold everybody accountable a little bit. Like if you just, if you're faced with the actual data every couple of years and you're not improving, that's something worth knowing. So it's purely observational data. This is not rocket science on any level in terms of research. But it's just an arena nobody was really looking at. And I do think it's been well received for that reason, if for no other.
This information plants a seed, I think, in people's minds when they're looking at teams.
Exactly.
Looking at how they're making decisions.
Exactly. And so we were able to partner with AIPLA, which was really exciting for us. I mean, my firm is pretty small. AIPLA is huge.
Yeah, they are.
There were a couple of committees that were willing to co-sponsor it with us. And then they actually, initially, we also had Intel. We had an in-house counsel person from Intel who was really interested in the project, brought some resources to it. And so then we designed a more extensive survey, which then we pushed out to the AIPLA members so the first time I reported was in 2018. So then the second time we did it was 2020. It gave us some interesting data, not dissimilar, I have to say, but also then when we presented it, which was by Zoom, it was 2020.
Sure.
We had a great panel. We had, a few different people, different backgrounds. And that was just of all the discussions we've had, that was one of the liveliest discussions we've had at AIPLA around the data. And I just feel like every time we go and present, everybody's just even more excited about it. So we did the same thing this past year in 2022, and then presented at the annual meeting in person this time, had a great panel discussion. And, comparing to where we were in 2018, when we were in like this little side room at 4:00 in the afternoon, here now in 2022, it was really well attended. It was really kind of standing room only. And one of the comments that I made at the time, I think I even told the audience this, is, it used to be diversity panels were things that, you just saw a bunch of people of color and white women in those in those rooms. Not in this one in 2022. It was filled with people. I saw lots of older white men in that room. And most importantly, I just remember looking out and seeing so many people nodding with what we were talking about.
What do you think changed? Why do you think suddenly white men were showing up at this? And
I think, look, I do think, there's what's happened in litigation, but there's also what's happened in the world, right? So I definitely feel like there's been a bit of a reckoning on race in the country. I think, we've had Me Too happen. And I think, concurrent to that and going along, and I'm sure this is true in other professions as well, but, these ongoing conversations in the legal world like this one and other ones surrounding this topic, I think people are really sort of starting to recognize, like, diversity isn't about quotas. Diversity is not about, oh, I got to fill certain boxes so I don't get in trouble. That's not what diversity is about. Diversity is about building strong teams and diversity is going to undergird any strength of any team that you have. And that, I think, that's generally why I think we have better attendance more head nodding.
Hmm.
I just think that some of the resistance originally that I think that we've been fighting against for a long time, I think a lot of that resistance has started to fall away, which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. What about other players at trial, like testifying executives, technical experts,
Oh,
damages?
sure. Yes. Um, yeah, it's interesting. So I mean, it's a great question because there's a lot more work to do. I'm really happy. One of the things I don't want to fail to mention is that so in this last when we presented the last time in 2022, the biggest change that we saw, and it was substantial. Like it was something that was kind of wild. So in 2020, 59% of the associates in our survey were men, 41% were female. That's in 2020. Fast forward to 2022, 37% of the associates were male and 63% of the associates were female. So we saw a near flip, male to female for gender of associates. That tracks with law school graduation. That there's some other larger data out there that tracks with, but to see that many young women in IP litigation, that there's more of them than there are men that are getting these roles at trial, like that's a sea change, frankly, in a pretty short period of time. So I feel like things are shifting quickly, but there's still work to be done. One place I would say there's a lot of work to be done is getting more female experts. At least in IP, we still see a lot of male experts. I don't know what the number is. I could probably look at our data, but there are lots and lots of male experts, very few female experts. There's some. I've seen some. Julie Davis is a very successful female damages expert that we see in IP cases a lot. She's had a lot of success. I've seen several female technical experts. Frankly, one of the most effective technical experts that I've ever seen was a woman named Kellen Kuhn, who was an Intel fellow. She will tell you everything you need to know about, semiconductors. It's just
Hmm.
insane how bright
Hmm.
she is. Like, she was incredible. But that being said, I think that if you as an expert and as a female, you have to be exemplary. So the
Hmm.
two women I just named are actually exemplary. And I'm not saying they've never stubbed their toe on a stand. I'm sure they have. But that's the piece that's a little unfortunate, right? I'm not saying that you can ever be a mediocre expert, but I think there's more room for men to make mistakes. And I think women are held to a much more challenging standard on the stand. I think women are held to a more challenging standard in the courtroom, when they're stand-up trial lawyers than men are.
Hmm.
Still, I think that's just still true. I think people of color across both genders still struggle to be judged equally. I think that's the one place where I think that's just a lot of residual sexism and I don't want to say racism. That's, just preconceived notions about gender and race that are detrimental to women and people of color who are trying to do well in those arenas. I think there's still equity that needs to be built on there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's it. That's really interesting. I have a lot of thoughts about that. I always joke that as a guy, I'm very used to screwing up, so just move on. But not everyone has that luxury. I think it's possible that if somebody screws up and they are in an identified class other than white, you might attach, well, they screw up. Oh, that's a woman screwing up, or maybe, I don't know. Maybe people think
Yeah,
that way. Maybe they do,
I,
maybe they don't. But
I think they do. I think they don't mean to, right? I'm not criticizing anybody for doing that. I think that's just cultural. But I think those things are changing, right? Those things are changing. I've seen it change over my career. I think it's changing. It's going in the right direction. but there are still a lot of cultural, I mean, look, I mean, you still hear people in political focus groups saying, I can't imagine voting for a woman for president.
Right.
That's just a holdover, right? Like that's just a weird holdover. Whereas Angela Merkel, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, I mean, plenty of countries have women as leaders, and yet it still is
and not just mediocre ones either.
Right.
Real
right,
leaders. Real leaders.
Yes, absolutely.
Not just occupying the office.
Right.
I have to think too that I don't know, just generalizing, it's hard to imagine modern couples where anybody would say, oh, my daughter can't do this, she's a girl. There's none of that runs like a girl, take home ec. Maybe that exists in some backwater areas of the country, but largely I think parenting, I think it probably has changed dramatically since when I was a boy. Although my sister didn't care, she did whatever the hell she wanted. But
I found most women do. Most women do. Like that's the other thing that's really good. Like I don't know that I don't think I've ever met a weak woman, right? It's just the weirdest thing ever. But that's
that's probably
side note.
Yeah, that's true. So what's next? You're on this mission clearly, and it's a good one. So what's next for you?
I mean, I'm interested in this. I like this notion of being able to do sort of I don't know what do you call it? What do you call a sub pod? Like what do you what do you call like a spin-off?
I don't know.
Like a spin-off of Tom's emerging litigation podcast.
Right.
A little spin-off to continue the conversation with the people who are in the game, right? I mean, I have a particular vantage point because I'm a consultant. I sit in the gallery, but I'm not in the well, right? I'm not in the well. I'm not on the witness stand. Those who can't do teach, I guess. It's like I mean, I also didn't go to law school, so there's that. But so I'm looking forward to having these conversations with some judges, some litigators, some women, some people of color on this topic to get their perspectives on, to take this data that's observational that says, okay, we all have a sense that IP litigation and particularly trial teams lacks diversity. Great. We've shown that over, 3 different studies over a 6-year time frame. But let's talk to some people and gather some qualitative information about, why do they think that is? How can we work to fix those problems? Because I think the judges have a lot to do with that. And then also, how do we coach young folks to help them if they want to move into these arenas? How do we help them do that? That's what I'm interested in. The older I get, and I'm coming up on a 30-year career. Can't believe I'm, coming up on
that flew by.
Yeah, right. I mean, I started in 94. So yeah, coming up here pretty soon on a 30-year career. And it's one of the things I really do enjoy is mentoring and helping young lawyers, even in just sort of the role that I'm in. They appreciate it. I enjoy it. So hopefully that's a piece of what this work, this conversation, and then this ongoing conversation through this spinoff pod can help. Can if it helps move 2 or 3 people forward, or helps 2 or 3 people think about ways they, or even decision makers. Hey, there's a reason. Get young people, get people of color on your teams, get them in front of judges, get them some practice, get them opportunities. Like if I can move the needle on that at all, that would make me happy.
Tara Trask, always a pleasure to work with you on, and I appreciate you taking your time on this.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Tom.
That concludes this episode of the Emerging Litigation Podcast. If you have any questions about anything you heard on the podcast or would like to participate, please write to me at editor@litigationconferences.com. The Emerging Litigation Podcast is a co-production of HB Litigation and Critical Legal Content, my companies, and Fastcase, and our friends at Law Street Media, David Nair, Editor-in-Chief. This is also the audio companion to the Journal on Emerging Issues in Litigation published by Fastcase, Full Court Press. Tom Hagee, Editor-in-Chief, Morgan Wright, publisher. I'm your host, Tom Hagee. That's why I'm talking, and I don't know if it needs to be said, but this is not legal advice. Unless telling you it's not legal advice is legal advice, although I'd argue it's just plain common sense. Thanks for listening. Give us a rating, share with friends. See you on the next episode.